Time to talk a little ACC football with some of the enemy.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles and a crossover with Locked On Canes and Alex Dono. Thank you for stopping in, Alex. I appreciate it. Going to talk a little ACC today, Florida State and Miami, big picture, some college football stuff. Thank you for everybody for stopping in to check us out today. Alex, are you surprised with the start to the season the way it is, like across, not just the ACC, but like there's a lot of weird stuff going on. Just first off, what are your thoughts about college football after a few weekends of football?
It's wild, especially I think in the ACC because obviously Florida State's 0-2 start. You know, I know you see the colors that the hat I'm wearing and the colors that are behind me. You know, people may think I took that a certain way, but I actually preseason predicted the Florida State Seminoles to win the ACC. I know that they lost a lot of talent, but they brought in a lot of talent. I think Mike Norvell is an excellent football coach. I really have a hard time explaining what's happened so far this season outside of the fact that maybe we overrated the line of scrimmage talent a little bit or a lot because they've been getting pushed around. And then, well, I mean, Brian, I wasn't sold on DJ Uiagalelei, coming back to the ACC. And my fears there have been realized and then some. He has been so poor and so inaccurate to start the season. So I just have to wonder, if Florida State can find kind of a bounce back moment, then even if they do, is it actually too late to make a run in the ACC? Because not only are they 0-2 overall, they're 0-2 in the conference. They're the only team that's opened up with already 2 ACC games so far this year. I had brought up this point with Kenton Gibbs on Locked On ACC. I feel kind of embarrassed about some of the way the non-conference games have gone in the ACC because Virginia Tech, they were supposed to go into Nashville and steamroll Vanderbilt.
I had them by 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, they lost that game in overtime, but they had to come back from a 17-point deficit just to lose the game in overtime. And then Clemson, not that I expected Clemson to beat Georgia. I mean, who did really? But I thought maybe they could score a touchdown. And, Clemson can still play defense, and I think their defense is going to keep them in a lot of games this year. So I'm not completely writing Clemson off as a contender to win the ACC because I do trust their D, but I do not trust their O, and I do not trust their quarterback, Cade Klubnik. And that, to me, is where, for Dabo Swinney, not using the transfer portal, I think that's somewhere where it's especially biting him because if Dabo did use the transfer, I think Clemson would have gone out and, got somebody the way that, Miami brought in Cam Ward, for example, and, the way, Florida State brought in DJ, although that one's not working out so far, or the way that NC State brought in Grayson McCall from Coastal Carolina. Now, NC State is another one, they won their debut against Western Carolina, but it was far from convincing. They trailed entering the fourth quarter. And then to stay on that big picture note, Brian, I'm wondering, is NC State going to be maybe the next embarrassing point in the conference this weekend? Because they got the Tennessee Volunteers.
And it's a neutral.
And Tennessee looks good. Yeah.
If you have not seen, and I'm going to try to pronounce it right, Nico Iamaleava, or however you say it,
I just call him Nico.
Yeah. I saw him when he was a sophomore in high school on some film. I'm like, wait a minute. Because he was just standing there, not throwing it, like just warming up. I'm like, he's throwing harder than some guys in the NFL. He's a sophomore in high school. And I'm like, he's figured it out. That offense is pretty simplistic, so he doesn't have to do a lot of post-snap reads anyway. They spread it out so well. That offense is a great fit for Nico. If NC State, they got some pretty good corners, but if their deep secondary is not ready because they're going to try to isolate those guys, I'm very worried about what you just said. That could be like 38-21, maybe worse. I don't like that game very much for NC State. So besides Miami, we'll talk about them in a second. What team in the ACC are you like, this team could challenge Miami at the top of the conference? Is there one? And if it is, who might that be?
I think a lot of people are sleeping on Louisville a little bit, and they had They had a sterling debut now against lesser competition, of course. So we're going to learn more about Louisville in the coming weeks, but it's a very talented team. And they've worked the transfer portal very hard. I know that there was some weird stuff that happened to them in the portal where they lost some of the players in January they brought in, transferred out in April. But, you know, whatever the story behind that was, I still think they have a good team. And for Louisville, like the big question for them, I think, is Tyler Shuck, their new starting quarterback. Can he stay on the field? Because he hasn't done that in his career, but when he's on the field, he's been excellent. He threw for an insane amount of yards and touchdowns in their opening game. So I still take Louisville seriously. But my ACC big board has kind of been turned upside down, Brian, because again, like Florida State, we're heading into week 2, and like they're already 2 games behind in the conference with 2 in the loss column. You know, Clemson, again, I wonder if they're just going to be able to score enough. Louisville, I do take seriously as a contender. You know, preseason, I was very high on NC State, and maybe I shouldn't overreact to a not so great first game. We'll see how they look against Tennessee this weekend, which could be huge opportunity for them. It could also get really ugly. Virginia Tech, I was very high on before the season started. And then now, like, I'm wondering how much stock do I put into teams like Boston College and Georgia Tech because they've beaten Florida State to start the year? Were we underrating them a little bit, especially BC? Because Georgia Tech most people had them in the top 10 in the ACC. I think I had them 6th or 7th, maybe.
That's almost exactly where I had them too. I knew they'd be better, but they're physical, Alex. That is a downhill football team.
They are, and I think that I think their quarterback Haynes King is a little bit underrated. Their defense, you know, looks a lot better because they couldn't stop the run to save their lives last year. You know, of course, as a guy who covers Miami, I'm well aware that sometimes when you play against Georgia Tech, upsets will happen. I am not forgetting, you know, what happened at Hard Rock Stadium a season ago. So yeah, so I'm starting to take Georgia Tech a little bit more seriously. You know, I think a team like Cal is talented. I just don't think that they have the bodies, especially at the line of scrimmage, to really contend this year. SMU is one that I wonder about because they looked really bad in their opening game. They looked a lot better in their second game. SMU loaded at the skill positions, like absolutely loaded, a lot of speed. But again, I don't know about their line of scrimmage. I see SMU as maybe a team that would maybe finish 4th or 5th in the conference. So, you know, again, my way too early reaction, you know, Miami looks great. So I can understand why Miami, at least for now, are the odds-on favorite to win the ACC. I'm not completely turning the page on Clemson because guess what? Georgia's going to embarrass a lot of teams this year. That's not the only time that's going to happen. So Miami, Clemson, Louisville, I think those are probably the teams that I'm highest on right now.
SMU is the team I'm curious about, like you, because they've got a quarterback in Preston Stone, got a really good group of skill guys, but I'm not sure they took some of their early opponents all that serious, and that is never the right recipe. Interestingly, if I remember correct, their first home ACC game is against the Noles. That's in a few weeks.
Yeah, I
bet you they're a little more motivated for that game, Alex. What do you think?
Yeah, and that was one, like, before the season started, I had that penciled in as a Florida State victory, and now who knows? Like, I think anytime Florida State takes the field now, you have to kind of wonder, you know, well, what's going to happen? Which team is going to show up? So, like, I'm not saying SMU necessarily wins that game, but I feel that one is now a toss-up where it didn't feel like a toss-up before the season started.
Well, with that, we're going to talk a little more about the greater landscape of college football, some Georgia, some different things, a little Knowles, etc. But coming up next, it's going to be a little broader. That's here on Locked On Seminoles and crossover with Locked On Canes. All right. Today, we are sponsored by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else. Even those that aren't actively searching for a new job might happen to be on that opportunity for a perfect role with your company through LinkedIn Jobs. So Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Just to get it out of the way, obviously Florida State's 0-2. Are you as shocked as myself and the brethren on Locked On Seminoles? And then we'll go into the national stuff. Or were you like, just like, what's happening? Because I mean, we texted like for the first set games, like it seemed that you were that way, but I just want you to clarify. What are your thoughts on Florida State?
Yeah, I'm shocked even more than the quarterback play. Like the quarterback play has been bad, but I've never been a DJ Uyunglele believer. So I mean, but then at the same time, it's like, what is he, a 6-year guy now, 5th-year guy at the very least? So yeah, 5th-year guy. So I maybe some maturity, because he did seem to be a little bit more consistent at Oregon State than he was, before he basically got run out of Clemson when he was there prior. So, but I'm not as shocked about DJ. I'm really shocked about the offensive line and the defensive lines. I mean, heralded as the best defensive line in the country. First episode of College Game Day, Pete Thamel is on the panel. I talked to all these NFL scouts, best defensive line in the country. Those guys don't look like they want to be there. They don't look like they want to make tackles. You and I were talking about Darrell Jackson, who, he played at Miami a couple of years ago, wasn't able to play last year because of, the inconsistencies of the transfer rules that they've now corrected that. And he gets himself into the right areas, but it's like he doesn't want to make tackles. It's just really odd watching that. And then the stat that stood out most to me from the Boston College game, Brian, and I guess because Florida State was playing from behind a lot in that game, but still, you can't establish or commit to a running game, because I was very high on Florida State's running game prior to the season. They go out there 6 carries for 21 yards in that BC game. So this is something that, I guess the bye week is probably coming at a good time for them, because there's a lot of stuff to straighten out before they face Memphis. I mean, before they face Memphis, they got to straighten some stuff out.
By the way, it's 16 for 21, not 6. That's how bad it is. It's 1.3 yards per carry. It's brutal. And I'm still perplexed over it, but I'm going to read off a few teams in the current AP poll, for whatever it's worth. It's never, in my opinion, super accurate, other than probably the first 5 to 8 teams. That's usually pretty good. Tell me if you think any of these teams are likely to fall off. This is the AP top 10 in order. Georgia 1, Ohio State Buckeyes 2, Texas 3. Bama comes in at 4, Notre Dame 5, Ole Miss 6, Oregon 7, Penn State 8, Missouri 9, Michigan at 10. What do you see there that you don't like?
The two that stand out to me most are Oregon. They had a really shaky debut, but I don't know. Maybe that was an aberration. And I know our guy Spencer McLaughlin, who does an awesome job on Locked On Ducks and on Locked On College Football, is wondering if that might have even been like a wake up call for them, because Oregon was, a lot of people had them penciled in to win the Big Ten, to be a team that gets a first round bye in the playoffs. So their debut was shocking to me. Maybe they'll turn it around. Obviously a tougher schedule now in the Big Ten, but the team, to me, staying in the Big Ten, I think Michigan's going to come off the rails. I mean,
they play Texas this weekend, Alex.
They played Texas, and I think at home they might get boat raced. I mean, the Longhorns are 7.5-point favorites right now. I saw it. I think earlier I saw it at 8. I'm going to take Texas to cover. I think Texas might boat race them. I mean, listen, all the negativity and the sanctions and the potential sanctions that could still be coming from Michigan, the head coach change. I was reading today that Sharon Moore, their head coach, is working right now without a contract. Just unheard of. I mean, have you ever heard of that before?
Wait a minute. Legally, how is that? Like, if he had a slip and fall, how does that even, you know what I mean? Like, anything can happen. That's bizarre.
I don't know. They have him working 1099 right now. Is he an independent contractor? Like he doesn't have a long-term contract signed, which to me, it's like, how does your agent even let that happen? Because guess what? If they lose to, not saying this will happen, but if they lose by 4 touchdowns to Texas, they may just tell him, Mr. Moore, don't bother showing up to work next week, and we don't have to pay you a buyout because you don't have a contract yet.
I wonder if they're really worried that the NCAA is going to come out with more, or there's going to be more information.
Yeah.
They
And
don't
that
want
he
him
may
to
be linked to
sign,
some of it. Yeah.
and they don't, even if it's legitimate to fight, they just rather not hire. They put themselves in that situation though. They tried to protect Harbaugh and the program as long as they could, and that's where they are. The other one that I at least think is interesting that you brought up, Oregon. It's weird because at one point the quarterback was something like 31 or 37 or something, like 350 yards, but they had 14 points.
Yeah.
It's like, how is that possible? They're not playing anybody. So I don't know how to make that
Idaho.
up. Yeah, I mean, it's Idaho. Come on, man. The Vandals or whatever. Come on.
Yep.
I think SC will be ahead of Michigan pretty soon. I mean, they beat LSU. I think they deserve to go up some.
Yeah.
Utah's right on the edge. I think they should be ahead of Michigan. But it's a topsy-turvy football world. For Miami, do you think they are deserving of at least consideration for top 10 now, or is that too early?
I think it's a little too early. Because first of all, I guess the truth is going to be told on the field in both directions. And I'm not like, I know that a lot of people are saying, well, it turns out Florida was just terrible, so maybe you shouldn't give Miami that much credit. I'm not on that boat, because to me, like, you can't argue how composed Miami was in that road environment. I mean, Cam Ward looked like he was so calm. It was like he was waiting in line at Walgreens. Like, the guy was just like another day at the office for him, and he played incredible. But it's just one game to me. And I know, Miami started the season 19th, and then they jumped up 7 spots to 12. I thought that was fair. I am a believer in Miami's roster, and I think they're going to end up finishing the season, especially with the way the ACC looks right now. I think Miami will end up finishing the season top 10, and hopefully win the ACC for the first time. But at the same time, like, given the expectations and just knowing it's Miami, and Miami has been so inconsistent over the years, I'm okay with them being outside the top 10 and having the opportunity to prove it. But then at the same time, I still think preseason rankings are ridiculous, because the other part of me says, hey, both Miami and USC, they looked like top 10 teams the opening week, but since they were both, outside the top 15, they only allowed them to climb so much. Like, with the way USC played against LSU, which is not an easy out whatsoever, and they were underdogs in that game. Like, I kind of felt like USC probably should be a top 10 team after that, but since they were 23 the week before, they only jumped up 10 spots. So I'm perfectly fine letting this all marinate. And I kind of like now this new college football playoff format. I like it a lot, that you award conference winners with the first round bye. And I'm fine. I'm not going to make too many hot takes about the rankings until we're at least 3 or 4 weeks into this thing and everyone's played a conference game.
I'm kind of there with you. The way Miami's schedule shakes out, they got Florida A&M this week, or who is it?
Yeah. Florida A&M, and then Ball State the next week, and then South Florida, which could be a tricky game in Tampa. But then they don't play an ACC opponent until 5th game of the year against Virginia Tech.
After Virginia Tech, speaking of national picture, they were everybody's media darling in the ACC coming in. They were down 17 early, if I remember right, something like that. Vandy. I mean, that juggernaut. Like, that's another ACC. Like, you were kind of hoping that the league would step up. NC State doesn't look good. Florida State doesn't look good. Virginia Tech lost in overtime to Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
It's just like the league was on its last leg in some ways anyway, with the lawsuits and all that with Florida State and Clemson. And Clemson, of course, got boat raced by Georgia. Miami and Louisville are really the only two that gave a ton of credibility, and Carolina at least won the road game. I know it's Minnesota, but it's a road game to open the year, and you didn't know who your quarterback was really going to be, and he got hurt. So I don't even know what's going to happen in Carolina either. So the league is wild. Last thing I want to talk about today is something you and I have just touched on a little bit in private conversation. In the month of October, the NCAA is voting on whether or not to get rid of one of the other portal windows. All indications are the spring window is going to go bye-bye. And I already talked about it a little bit. Teams that missed this year in high school recruiting in December/February if they miss anybody in the portal in December, there is no fixing. If they get rid of the spring, everybody knows it's probably going away. Coaches want it to go away, etc. Do you think that's really going to, like, Florida State and Miami have used the portal a ton the last few years?
Yeah.
I wonder if it's going to hurt those teams a little more, because the advantage with the spring portal is you go through spring practice and then you have it. So you know exactly where you are. At least you should as a staff. If you don't, it's on you.
Yeah.
Do you think it'll be even more of a Wild West and like the NIL and all that, or to be crazier? What do you think is going to transpire with that?
I mean, I would think if they're going to get rid of that spring portal, and they probably are going to, that their expectation would be to make things less crazy. From where I sit, I don't like it, because you outlined some of it. I think it gives you such an opportunity to assess where your program is after spring football, and to identify, like, hey, we've had about a month's worth of practices in a spring game, and we see clearly these are a handful of needs we would like to address. Let's go out in the transfer portal, try to bring in some veterans. Like, honestly, for that reason, I kind of like the spring portal better than I like the winter portal, which is the one they're probably going to keep. Even though, like, the advantage of the early portal window is you get your guys in for spring football, so they hit the ground running. So I understand that aspect of it, but it's like, I think it really takes away an important, so I'm surprised that so many coaches are on board with this for that reason. But then the flip side of it is, and I'm sure, anyone who coaches on the Louisville staff, for example, would probably say, okay, this is fantastic, because how many guys did we have who transferred in January, and then 3 months later they're out, they're transferring somewhere else. So I guess it's just to limit some of that chaos. But I don't know, because again, like, when you're doing the winter portal and you're recruiting high school players right around the same time you're recruiting portal players, I think it maybe hurts recruiting a little bit, because maybe you bring in a veteran at a certain position and a recruit may say, well, they're not going to need me as much there. You and I are both very much into high school recruiting, you even more so than me, but I'm an enthusiast in that as well. I like the spring window, but then at the same time, it kind of turned into a caricature, right? Because this past year was crazy. Like, it was so crazy, where you even had some players who would, transfer out of their school in January and then transfer back to the very same school they left in April. Like, it's nuts. So I guess I understand why they're getting away from it. But if I were thinking like a coach and the opportunities I have to address needs in my roster, I guess this puts more of an emphasis on developing the players you have. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, to schools out there like Miami, like Florida State, schools who are very active in the transfer portal, I think this probably takes more away from them than it gives to them.
Yeah, I think the teams that have been heavy in the portal, at least for 1 year, could suffer a little bit next season. Because again, assuming that it goes with the way that Alex and I are talking about, and it's just winter, even if you hit on the guys you needed, if you have an injury in spring to your, like Maui Noah or somebody like that gets hurt next spring, you can't replace a guy. That's an NFL player. That's a whole nother level, but at least you could maybe get a veteran. Like, I don't think Matt Lee was replaced completely by Carpenter, but Carpenter's pretty good. They hit it 2 years in a row at center. Miami did a good job, and that's a critical spot to have experience. Were they ready at center if they didn't use the portal there? Maybe, but I don't know who it would have been. So I understand the needs. It's a really interesting conversation. Thank you very much for making Locked On your favorite podcast network, whether it's Locked On Seminoles, Locked On Canes. For Brian Smith and Alex Dono, thank you very much. We will see you again very soon.